My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
I'd like to welcome you back to another episode. We are going to continue with our listener questions about the Colonial Parkway murders. Before we get into listener questions, we would like to take an opportunity to thank everyone who has sent in questions and to ask all of you to make sure that you take a moment to rate and review our podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts.
Ratings and reviews make a tremendous difference for a podcast like ours. Your show of support, that you like the podcast, that you listen to the podcast, a little bit about why you like the podcast is very much appreciated, and it really helps us reach new audiences. Thank you so much for doing that.
We're going to go ahead and pick back up with our listener questions. We had so much that we couldn't fit it all into one episode. And we do encourage you to keep those questions coming, whether we're doing an episode of them or not. Any questions that you may have, you can send to us on social media, both from Mind Over Murder and the Colonial Parkway Murders. We also have a webpage, so you can contact us through the webpage, and you can also get us through Facebook Messenger.
So many ways to reach us.
And we do thank everybody who reaches out, whether it's with questions, comments, concerns, or tips. We really do appreciate it. We try our best to get back to everybody sooner or later at some point.
And as we were discussing last week, we have actually received a lot of interesting tips, especially in the last year since the Lover's Lane murder television series ran. And we really appreciate it. We do follow up with tipsters. As a matter of fact, I spoke to a guy for over 2 hours last night who had new information, potentially in the Brian Pettinger murder, which is sometimes linked to the Colonial Parkway murders. It was a fascinating conversation. I can't say for sure if it would take the law enforcement investigators anywhere that would be new to the investigation, but it's hard for me to say. I had a fantastic 2 hour and 15-minute conversation with this guy last night, and we've had multiple tips in the Colonial Parkway murders and what Kristin calls Parkway adjacent cases, which I think you developed that expression on your own.
Yeah, I did. But I mean, it fit. And I was joking with Bill the other day that we seem to get a lot of tips over the holidays, like whatever holiday it is, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's or whatever. And then we ended up, Bill was spamming my inbox practically with all of these emails on President's Day. It was like, here's this tip and here's another and here's another. I called him and I said, so we're getting tips, not even on major holidays, but just like federal holidays. This is cool.
I do have a theory, because Kristin and I have talked about this quite a bit, regarding the major holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, no disrespect to Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, or any other major religious holidays. My thinking is we always seem to get tips around those major end-of-year holidays for a couple of reasons. I think people have time off, some extra time to think about things. A lot of them are very family-oriented holidays. Yeah. Of course, with COVID, all of us I know have struggled with how we're going to get together with family members and that kind of thing. In general, I find that we hear from people with information on those major holidays almost every single year.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
Yes. And unfortunately, it feels like sometimes it wins your holiday only in that, like, you have to follow up on it. And so I'll be calling Bill and going, hey, we're getting ready for Thanksgiving dinner. And he's like, okay, but I'm following up on this tip from this person and I have to call them right now. And now I'm late setting the table or making bread or whatever because you're in there following up on a tip about your sister's murder.
Yeah.
And we appreciate it, but boy, it can also be a little invasive at times trying to deal with all of it.
Yeah, my family has not reacted well on several occasions, and some of that's my fault. When I hear these things or someone reaches out to me, we know that sometimes someone will step forward, and then if they don't hear from you, they'll step back. And remember, we were just talking about all the different ways you can reach us. We live in this multi-platform world, and so people can reach you so many different ways. And some people want to remain anonymous, or they want to at least reach out and confirm that we are who we say we are. I find that if I don't jump on those things, sometimes those people will step back and then I'll never hear from them again.
Sure.
And our hope is always that somehow somebody is going to have something to say that's new and that will mean something to our investigators, which is why I feel compelled to jump on these things. My ex-wife and my longtime partner now both have given me the stink eye on numerous occasions around the holidays. What exactly are you doing when you should be in here celebrating Christmas with us or whatever, or setting the table?
Sure.
But at the same time, I feel compelled to jump into it because I'm afraid that someone will step back and I'll never hear from them again.
No, exactly. And I was talking to Jim Fitzgerald the other day, and he said all it takes is one tip, and maybe one tip will be the tip. And he's absolutely right, of course, which is why if you do send us a tip, we will follow up. That guarantee that tip is going to go all the way to the FBI. We will send it there if we think that it has merit to it. Absolutely. I'm sure that the FBI at some point or another is going to get sick of hearing from Bill if they're not there already.
Oh, I'm sure they're there.
But we think that you all send us that seems like, hey, there is some merit to this. Bill types it up, sends it to me and says, hey, how does this sound? Do I sound like an angry Irishman? And then he'll send it forward to the FBI. I'm sure that they're sick of hearing from Bill for sure. And if they know that I work in the background, they're probably sick of me enabling him.
We got a tip over Christmas that I did pass on to the FBI, and I remember apologizing to our FBI agents. They actually did follow up on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Very quickly.
It was lightning fast.
Ultimately, they came back, and again, very fast, and said they've taken a look at this, and they don't see a relationship between this kind of very disturbing information that we had been provided with and the Colonial Parkway murders. But that didn't mean that something terrible didn't happen a number of years ago in the peninsula area. It's just that they didn't see the relationship between these horrible things and the Colonial Parkway murders. So sometimes these things are handed off to other agencies within law enforcement. But it's an interesting place to find yourself because we've really put ourselves out there quite a bit in the last 10, 12 years. So people tend to come to us, the families, before they go to law enforcement for whatever reason.
We'll go ahead and jump back in. I really like this question. This question comes from Kiana Cunningham, and it delves a lot with something that I think you and I have been talking a lot about with regard to Kathy and Beckys' case. Her question is, have you contacted any organizations that specialize in investigating hate crimes? And has there been any further investigation into the hate crime angle on your sister's case?
It's a really good question. The short answer is yes. Now, the hate crime aspect to Kathy and Becky's murder, because they were a lesbian couple, doesn't seem to fit the other Colonial Parkway murders. We have had discussions with groups about the gay lesbian angle of Kathy and Becky's murder, and a number of people think that is a strong possibility. That might mean that Kathy and Becky's murder, which is the first in the Colonial Parkway murders, could be a freestanding event. But that is true of any of the homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders. Any one of them might fall off the table for any number of reasons. We don't know for certain that we're dealing with a 1, 2, 3, 4 linear, straight up serial killing series. And then, of course, you've got the Parkway adjacent murders that Kristin refers to, particularly Brian Pettinger and Laurie Powell. And there are other unsolved murders in that same time frame. I don't know what happened with this young man, Timothy Mangum, whose remains have just been identified. I'm not saying that's related to the Colonial Parkway murders, but there were other murders, many of them unsolved, that took place around the same time. So I've never lost sight of the fact that Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski's murder could be a hate crime. And yes, we have explored that with some of the agencies involved.
This one is from Brandy Doyle. Brandy asks, there were mentions in the book, A Special Kind of Evil, about detectives and investigators that had theories that they still stick to today, even though they are unable to prove them or are unable to collaborate with the FBI on them. I was wondering if any of them would be willing to be interviewed on the podcast to dive into their thought.
Brandy, I'd have to give that one some thought. Different detectives who've worked this case for FBI, Virginia State Police, or other law enforcement agencies have developed theories, and we'd certainly be open to interviewing some of them. It's a great idea. Something that we'd have to reach out to them and find out whether they're willing to or not. A lot of times, not always, these investigators, even if they're no longer working the case, are a bit reluctant to start offering their own viewpoint or discussing the case in any kind of in-depth way because they are still open investigations and they want to be respectful of the fact that investigators are still working these cases. But it's a really interesting idea. We definitely give it some thought. We have talked to a lot of those people off the record, and it would be interesting to see if any of them would be willing to go on the record to talk with us here on Mind Over Murder.
This next one is from Heather, and this is actually interesting because I don't think I know the answer to this one, but I'm betting that you do because you're the expert on all things Parkway.
No pressure.
This is from Heather Kuhn. Have all of the park and recreation park rangers that were employed at the time of the murders been questioned and polygraphed?
I'm going to give you my gut answer because first I have to say up front, we can't say for sure. Because this is the sort of thing that I'd like to know the answer to, but when I've asked questions like this, law enforcement refuses to answer. The idea of a park ranger or other law enforcement officer being responsible for some or all of the Colonial Parkway murders has been part of the mix since the very beginning. I can't tell you definitively, Heather, that every single park ranger or other law enforcement officer who was in that area at the time of the Colonial Parkway murders has been questioned, and I certainly can't tell you whether or not they were polygraphed. I know some individual park rangers and law enforcement officers whose behavior was considered odd or strange or suspicious, perhaps, that were questioned, and some of them were polygraphed. One in particular was a National Park Service ranger who was a person of interest in the Colonial Parkway murders, who was later transferred up to the Shenandoah National Park in time to be there for the murder of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans, a lesbian couple that was murdered up there in 1996. I found that a very strange coincidence. There were actually 4 National Park Service rangers who were working on the Colonial Parkway during the Colonial Parkway murders who were also up in the Shenandoah National Park at the time of the Williams-Winans murder in 1996. And I know at least one of them was given a polygraph exam. I know it happened. I know that certain park rangers and other law enforcement personnel were questioned, but I can't say that everybody was, and I can't say certainly that everybody was given a polygraph exam.
We're looking forward to talking to our friend Kate Miles, who is about to release a book on the Julie Williams, Lolly Winans murders a little bit later this year. And there are some very interesting parallels between the Williams-Winans murders and the Thomas Dowski murder. And so look for some further information about that case in an interview with Kate Miles.
Kate Miles' book comes out May 3rd, 2022. It's called Trailed, One Woman's Quest to Solve the Shenandoah Murders. We refer to her as Kate because she's a friend, but her author name is actually Catherine Miles. Kate is an outstanding writer who has won a number of awards and written some fantastic books. It'll be really interesting to see where she takes the Shenandoah murders of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans. I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating read. So it comes out May 3rd. And I do have a verbal commitment from Kate that she'll come onto the podcast and talk to Kristin and me about Trailed.
Next question is from Robin Couch. Robin asks, have any mediums or psychics been able to give any valuable information? I think the key word in this question is valuable, because we have had mediums and psychics, probably more, I think, than strictly necessary, who have weighed in on the case But I am interested, Bill, what you think about whether or not any valuable information has been gained.
Robin, it's a great question. This had come up again recently. Went back to Joyce Call Canada, who is Keith's older sister. So she's Bill Thomas of the Call family. Extremely knowledgeable and a wonderful person with a great recall for things that took place during the initial investigation of her brother Keith and Sandy's disappearance. They have brought psychics in a couple of times. As a matter of fact, there was even a television show that was built around bringing these psychics in to take a look at some of the evidence and information in the Colonial Parkway murders. I guess the valuable part of your question, Robin, is the part that I would struggle with, because I do think there are things that are out there in the world that we don't necessarily all understand. So I'm not poo-pooing the work of the psychics. And they have made several attempts at providing information to law enforcement using kind of unconventional methods. I don't know if anything significant has come out of it. Joyce and her aunt Lou Call are less skeptical than I am of these methods. And they do recall that they tried. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be something I'd be terribly comfortable with, but if somebody ever wanted to try it again, I wouldn't stand in their way. I don't think I would be necessarily the person to take the lead on something like that. It probably would be somebody like Joy or her aunt. The television series was called Sensing Murder, and I'm not sure if it's still available for viewing. Some of these older shows that were on cable back in the 80s and 90s are not necessarily that easy to find. If we can find it, we'll link to it in the show notes. But I remember Joyce was telling me about this episode of Sensing Murder, and it seems to me that one or two female psychics came in and were trying to look for clues, in particular into the Keith Call Cassandra Haley disappearance.
Or the door just creaked.
Was it spooky or was it the cat?
It was the cat, actually, but it took me a minute to realize that it was the cat.
I think you never know.
I would say it's a psychic opened the door. It occurs to me that I probably sounded...
I love the timing of the creaking door.
It really, yeah, the cat is very upset that I've kept him penned in the room for this long, and so he's running around being a little jerk. I realize that I sound probably more dismissive than I need to around the concept of psychics. And so I want to make sure that not trying to do it rudely. I just don't have a strong belief in that as something that can help with investigations. But that is solely a Kristin Dilley belief. That is not in anybody else's belief. Like, I'm not saying that Bill believes that. That's just it's a me thing. And if that's something I'm going to get dinged on, which I might, it is what it is.
I'm leaving all that in the podcast, by the way.
It's fine. You can.
I think
okay.
we should. You're speaking from the heart. Look, I'm in the skeptical category as well.
If you remember, I think it was maybe within the first year that you and I were getting to know each other, a friend of my dad's reached out to me and said that she wanted to walk the parkway and go to each of those different scenes and see what she could get out of it. She did, and I took her around to the two Parkway scenes. I didn't take her out to Ragged Island or to 64, but I took her to the Parkway scene. But nothing actionable came of it. And a lot of what she was giving in terms of information, some of it was so uncomfortable for me that I didn't want to give that to you. First of all, it wouldn't have felt right for me to come back to you and say, hey, Bill, she was sensing your sister being murdered. How do you feel about that? That was, there's something I think maybe just a little inherently distasteful in that for me, to try to be like, okay, I'm going to give that information to the brother of a murder victim. There's something about that kind of set my teeth on edge, to the extent that I think maybe that's where some of this distaste comes from. This is just part of what we get as citizen detectives, or whatever you want to call us, as we've gone through this process of looking into these murders. One of the things that makes me rather uncomfortable is when people do come forward with the psychic information, because I feel like at least some of that information is going to require giving information to family members that is not comfortable and may end up hurting your feelings. I didn't want to take some of what she had to say back to you or Joyce and say, hey, she was sensing your siblings being murdered. That's awful. How can I say that to you? I think that's where some of the distaste about psychic information comes for me. It's not anything I would feel comfortable sharing.
For me personally, I'm not offended, and I have a marshmallow center just like everybody else.
It's good to know.
For the most part, I think as long as people are respectful in the way they ask questions or describe situations, I'm not easily offended by people talking with me about the Colonial Parkway murders, or specifically about my sister Kathy and her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski's murder. We've talked about it a lot over the last 35 years. So as long as people aren't blatantly disrespectful, I'm usually willing to hear them out. You probably could have talked to me about it. It's okay.
Yeah. And I think right at the time that you and I were still starting to get to know each other, I think it was only a couple of months in. And I didn't feel comfortable enough saying, okay, on 3 months acquaintance. Okay, so she stood there in the middle of the field and was describing your sister getting hit over the head and then having her throat cut. It wasn't something that I was going to be able to do.
Not a pretty sight.
Yeah, not at all. But some of the me distancing myself from psychic conversation is rooted in that.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
This next question from Lindsay Greco, I think, is one that I particularly enjoyed thinking about. And I did tell her that it was an excellent question, that I wanted us to go into this. So her question is, I know you all believe it's unlikely that the Phelps-Lauer murders are connected to any of the other 3 sets. And she adds, agree 100%. But based on your vast knowledge and also your gut, do you truly think any of the remaining 3 sets are connected? If yes, why?
Boy, this is you could do a whole afternoon.
We do a whole episode on this one.
On this.
Yeah. We do a whole seminar and sell tickets practically.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's a really good question. Let me zero in, first of all, on incident number 4, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. Based on all the things that I've learned, and especially in the last few years, I am increasingly convinced that the Phelps-Lauer murder on Interstate 64 at the Hunt Club is not related to the other Colonial Parkway murders. I think the fact that there's $600 to $800 missing, and that Daniel's wallet, and I think Anna Maria's, for that matter, were never found. I think robbery is a motive there. And $600 to $800 30 plus years ago was even more money than it is now. And it's a fair chunk of change in my world. And for young people who were struggling, they were financially struggling, I think that was a lot of money. I also think it's quite possible that people who had traveled back with them from Virginia Beach that Labor Day weekend, who knew that Daniel was going to be picking up a large chunk of money from his dad for painting jobs, house painting jobs that he had done that summer, I think they need another look. I think the robbery motive is very strong there, and that I think it's quite possible that that murder of the 4 core double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders, I think that's the one that's most likely to fall off the table. The others, I can create plausible scenarios for each one of them that might mean that they are independent events. Now, I remember the FBI saying to me several years back that double homicides are rare, Lover's Lane homicides are rare. And I remember one of the senior agents saying to me, Bill, what are the chances that you're going to have 4 double homicides under similar circumstances? It's actually a 3-year period when you look at the calendar, 86 to 89. It's just barely over 3 years. And they said for that many double murders to be clustered in this way is extremely unusual. So I think even just the logistics and proximity of the murders might lead you to think that, look, at least some of these have to be related. Now, as we talked about last week, there's still nothing in the forensics that the various agencies have shared with the families that indicate that these are related forensically. So I am far from convinced that they're all related, and I think one or more of them do fall off the table as the questions that we all have regarding this series of murders begin to be answered.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely have the same feelings about Phelps and Lauer as you do. And I am starting to feel like Kathy and Becky's case may very well be a standalone hate crime adjacent event. It's, as you and I have said to each other and on the air a couple of times now, it kind of changes week to week almost how you feel on any given day because, we live with this. You live with it 100% every day. And in between me teaching classes and going on races and stuff like that, I'm thinking about it too. At this point, you and I have been investigative partners since 2016. I know this case backward and forward and hear it in my sleep sometimes. And I still don't feel like I have a great handle on what actually happened. I think that our theories kind of change depending on who we're talking to and what tips we're taking a look at and what we're talking about. It's a great question, Lindsay. Truly it is. And I think depending on what day of the week you get us, the answer is going to change a little bit.
Lindsay, it may be the question because obviously if these are independent events or some of them are independent events, now you're getting one step closer to answers in the Colonial Parkway murders. I've actually said recently to our FBI partners, I sometimes wonder if even the nomenclature, the phrase Colonial Parkway Murders is actually the biggest rabbit hole of all, that we actually put all these murders together. We actually may have made a really, truly fundamental mistake in that maybe these homicides are not all related. Even something as simple as giving these murders and this series a name begins to create a fence around them and impressions that ultimately will not be borne out by the evidence. We'll see.
We will see. This is our final question from Robert Gray, who asks, what does the recent passing of a certain suspect who resided outside the U.S. mean for the future of the Call Haley case? I knew who he was talking about as soon as he said it. I think you do too, based on the knowing grin on your face. And for anybody who may not follow the case closely enough to understand who we're talking about, we are talking about Ron Little, once of New Zealand and then again of New Zealand, as he did die there in, I think it was Christmas Day of this year, was it not?
Yeah, let's spend a couple of minutes on that. Okay. We've touched on this on our Facebook pages. Let's recap because not everybody sees our social media feeds. On or about December 1st, 2021, so a couple of months ago, I received a communication from someone in New Zealand informing me that longtime person of interest in the Colonial Parkway murders, Ron Little, had entered hospice. He'd had a recurrence of cancer, which he'd had a number of years before, and that he was not doing well and was not expected to live. I was very sorry to hear this. I don't know Ron Little personally, but his name has been associated with the Colonial Parkway murders all the way back to 1989. Ron Little, of course, was ultimately deported back to New Zealand by the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service and the FBI in August 1989. So he's actually out of the country and sent back to his native New Zealand by August 1989. So he's actually not even in the country at the time of the Phelps-Lauer murder. Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, who were murdered Labor Day 1989. So there's no way that he's directly involved in that particular double homicide. Back to the present day, starting around December 1st, I began to receive communication from people in New Zealand who indicated that Ron Little was not well. And these people put me in touch with Ron Little's family members. Now, Little, who did die on Christmas Day, 2021, had lived a very strange life. He had 5 different children by 5 different mothers. They range in age from 28 to 48 years old at present day. 3 of those children were born and reside in New Zealand. They're all grown-ups now, of course. And he had 2 children who were also grown-ups who were born in the United States. Over the last couple of months, so we're talking December into January, I ended up speaking via text or phone calls to 4 out of the 5 children I should call them offspring because they're not kids anymore. They're all adults about their father. They shared with me a fair amount of information about their father, and I've passed this information on to the FBI. There actually did seem to be a pattern emerging, although these 5 offspring didn't know each other very well, and in some cases barely knew each other at all. In the U.S. versus New Zealand contingents, had never had a relationship. There was a strong consensus building, and they began sharing this with me, that their father may have been involved in unsolved murders in Virginia. Over the course of December and January, I ended up speaking to a number of these people, shared with me their suspicions that their father may have been involved in unsolved murders in Virginia. Now, it isn't like Ron Little straight up confessed to the Colonial Parkway murders. And keep in mind, as we talked about on the podcast many times in these episodes, the Colonial Parkway murders, even the name, the Colonial Parkway murders, it all comes about later, and it's driven by media in the United States. He's telling his family a number of times over the years that he was involved in unsolved murders in Virginia. Ron Little worked at and then supposedly later purchased this small kind of C-level security company called Liberty Security based in Gloucester, Virginia. 2 people that he worked with directly, Brian Pettinger and Laurie Powell, these were employees of Liberty Security, were brutally murdered. When their father is referencing unsolved murders in Virginia, he might not necessarily be talking about the double homicides in the Colonial Parkway murders. He may be talking about the murder of Pettinger and Powell. These are separate events, often mentioned together because they both worked at Liberty Security. And they're right around the same time, for longtime followers of the podcast in this case, they are right around the same time of the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. His family ended up giving me a lot of information. He was involved in the drug culture in New Zealand. He was an extremely violent man. He was suspected of a number of different crimes. He had been incarcerated at different times. If he did half the things he claims to have done, he certainly served a remarkably small amount of jail time. Mm-hmm. He changed his name multiple times. He was born as Ron Little, changed his name to Chase Mills, and then later to Chase Duvalier Sr. And so he makes these very odd decisions to keep changing his name first once and then again. And so I end up talking to family members who have different names themselves. They're not all last name Little. We've passed this information on to the FBI. They're going to take a look at it. Some of the family members have offered to assist in any way that they can. They understand that although their father was sometimes a braggart and a very violent man and may have actually told some of these stories in an effort to kind of burnish his tough guy reputation, if you I'm sort of making a sour lemon face. As I say that, it just seems like a weird thing to claim to be involved in unsolved murders as if that gives you credibility, but that may have been part of the criminal underworld that he lived in. I certainly don't think that the Little family coming forward now with this information solves any unsolved murders or necessarily moves us closer to a resolution of the Call Haley disappearance, for example. We can't ever lose sight of the fact that in addition to his direct professional ties to Brian Pettinger and Laurie Powell, there are dotted line connections to Robin Edwards in that her mother, Bonnie Edwards, worked as a receptionist at Liberty Security, and that Cassandra Sandy Haley, her older sister, Terry Haley, who was a former Newport News police officer, had dated Steve Blackman, who has sometimes been mentioned in connection with the Colonial Parkway murders. Again, we have no knowledge that he's involved, but that he was associated with Ron Little and likely worked moonlighting shifts for Liberty Security while he was with the Gloucester County Sheriff's Department. So there are these dotted line relationships between Ron Little and, by my count, 4 murders of sick young people. It just seems odd and well beyond the realm of chance that one small kind of low-budget security company could have that many connections to all of these different people. 2 of their employees were murdered, brutally murdered, and then there's this dotted line connection to both Robin Edwards and Cassandra Haley in ways that you just think, there's no way that a small company with, I'd be surprised if there were 25 or certainly no more than 50 employees. What are the chances? I think that Robert's question is a very good one. We're definitely trying to explore that further. It's a shame that no one would have stepped forward sooner regarding their suspicions about Ron Little, but I think his family, given his history of violence and criminality in New Zealand as well as in the United States, I think they were hesitant to take him on, and they only began speaking up towards the end of his life when it became clear that their father was no longer a physical threat to them anymore.
And that does bring us to our final question, and this is from Christina Hurst. She very simply asks, what can we, as people who are interested in this case, do to move these cases forward? And we've had a number of people, of course, who ask us, can we write to somebody? Can we petition somebody? Can we donate money? What can we do? I think people just want, give me a thing and I'll do it. So is there anything that our supporters and our listeners can do right at the moment to help move the case forward?
I think the answer right now is nothing at this moment. I sincerely appreciate the question. It's something, if it's okay, I think we'd like to revisit that because there may be things on a going forward basis. I want to talk to the other families as we begin to move into this next phase of the investigation. We may call on our followers, if you will, to
army of adoring listeners.
Christina, it's a wonderful question. I really appreciate the sentiment. We definitely will keep it in mind. You're not the first person to ask, and it's something that we very much appreciate. So I think we're going to have to get back to you on that. At this moment, there's nothing, but I think there will be things in the future where we will ask people that are interested in this case, and people have been wonderfully supportive of the families over the years. I think we will be back to you with more information about how you can get involved or how you can show support.
And on a larger level, just from Bill and myself, we just encourage you to keep listening to the podcast, all of our episodes about the cases, learn as much as you can about the case, support all of our colleagues in podcasting who have kindly taken the time to feature our case on their various podcasts. And you've been on a ton of them at this point, Bill. I mean, it has to have been upwards of 20 different podcasts who've featured our case in some way, shape, or form. It's got to be at least that many, right?
Oh, I think so. And then, of course, I think the reason why we all got involved in this thing was because they all said, you should do your own podcast. And of course, then I said to Kristin, I'll do a podcast if you'll do a podcast.
We do ask anybody who wants to do something to help to just keep talking about the case, follow our social media pages, read up on it. We have had a couple people recently ask, hey, why don't you guys get on TikTok? We are not TikTokers at all. I see enough of it with my high school kids that I will never set foot in front of, I will never do anything associated with TikTok. I see too much damage that happens from it, but there is no denying that it is a very powerful platform. So I don't know, like maybe some of y'all can figure out a way to put this case on TikTok. I don't know. That is not my forte. And Bill, I don't know if you want to become a TikToker at this stage in the game.
Not that I plan to, but at the same time, our friend Sarah Turney was able to move her sister Elisa's case forward using the TikTok platform. And she ended up reaching a lot of people and putting pressure on law enforcement in Arizona. She's from Phoenix, successfully, ultimately resulting in the Phoenix PD putting resources back into the case. And sadly, her father, who has been the lead suspect in her sister's murder for all of these years, has now been charged, and that case is heading to trial in May. I talked to Sarah at length the other night, and Sarah did an amazing job. A lot of her media outreach was driven by her short TikTok videos, which she was very effective at. I can't knock it. When I've looked at the TikTok platform, it seems to be a lot of fun and silliness and dance videos. I don't necessarily see the true crime component of the TikTok platform, although Sarah certainly made it work for her.
Absolutely. And as a grumpy teacher, I've just seen enough of TikTok this year, both the kids watching it in the middle of class, but also the very destructive and viral slap your teacher TikToks, vandalize your school restroom TikToks,
those
call shooting threats in TikToks. Like I've had it up to here with TikTok. But
Well,
if there's a way to market it and make it work for us, as long as somebody who's not me is in front of the camera, hey, go for it.
Something to think about.
Something to think about for sure.
I think you see the worst of the TikTok platform, especially dangerous and destructive viral TikToks about let's do something really stupid. I definitely get your aversion.
Thank you so much to everybody who took the time to write in questions. Please keep sending in your questions. We will always take the time to answer them. And when we get enough questions, we'll do another episode just like this one. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.